Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, here in Silicon Valley at 11th Cloud Expo. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you're following this first general session, bright and early here on day 3. We have our good friends from Terremark up next, Jim Anthony, on perception versus reality in the cloud. There will, as usual today, be an awful lot of content. So open your minds, get ready for another long and, I hope, insightful day. But first of all, let's please say good morning to Jim Anthony.
Thank you. Wow, thanks for the warm reception. I appreciate it. There's a lot of people out there. Listen, I like to have a interactive session, so I can't see very well, but make yourself known. If you've got a question, I'm happy to answer it as we go through this, okay? We will get this session back on track. This will be a short presentation, so I've got plenty of room for questions. Feel free to ask them if you need to. So one of the things that I wanted to do today was sort of get the level set out, and let's figure out how to get some truth versus perception out into the general audience here about cloud itself, right? So let's set the level straight on a few topics, if you'll allow me. So first of all, let's talk about the definition of cloud. So cloud means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can define cloud. In reality, software as a service has been out a long time. Salesforce.com's made a name there, and there's a lot of other software platforms that are out as well. Not so long in the tooth, if you will, in terms of cloud technologies and capabilities. Platform as a service and infrastructure as a service are really gaining some momentum in the market. So I would encourage you to actually, when you go out and start looking at cloud services, and trying to understand what's out there and what's available, have a very clear definition in your mind of what you're actually looking for. Are you really looking for a software solution? Are you looking for an infrastructure solution? Or perhaps something in between as a platform solution? It's very critical to know exactly what you're looking for as you begin that search and begin evaluating vendors. Some vendors offer cloud services, but they don't offer them necessarily in the format or the platform that you're looking for. Okay, so make sure that you understand the definition of cloud, and that the vendors you're working with, you guys are in alignment in terms of that definition. So it's a very important concept. So, one of the misconceptions out there is that cloud isn't ready for the enterprise. Well, what does this actually mean? It's not ready for the enterprise. Does that mean that only non-enterprises are adopting cloud? Well, not really. I think that what's implied there is that the bigger the organization, the less likely that they're going to be adopting cloud. And I think that's what's sort of implied there. But we're starting to see trends go differently, right? We're starting to see bigger and bigger organizations give up on the idea of creating their own cloud platform, whether it's infrastructure as a service or platform or whatever. And they're actually moving out into the world. They're consuming cloud from various vendors, various locations, the things that meet their need. So cloud is showing up in the enterprise. It's showing up in a lot of different ways. For example, if you've ever booked a hotel room online, or if you've ever had it your way, if you know what I'm saying, if you've ever filed your taxes from any other government form online or whatever, if you've actually ever gone to the federal website and put in the information for a work visa, you've used the cloud to do that. Okay, you've used infrastructure as a service to actually get that done. So it's out there. It's big, it's safe, it's secure, and it's running some of the most critical applications for various businesses around the world. So let's talk about some of the realities with cloud. When you talk about enterprise cloud platforms, one of the things that's very important is stability and performance, right? So the cloud vendors have to get used to the fact that the infrastructure is going to be sold and resold to many different customers, but yet the platform's got to be built in such a way that it's reliable, stable, and it performs well for all those customers at any given time. From that perspective, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have a lot of similar industry customers running on the same platform. Usually those similar industry customers will have the same sort of demand spikes. That's going to create some issues in terms of performance and reliability within that particular cloud environment. So it's critical to spread things around within your cloud environments, within your various different vendors that are out there. They've got to have some sort of mechanism to allow balancing of load, distribution of load across multiple platforms in event that industry spikes actually occur. Viability is another important concept. There are more and more larger companies, such as the one I work for, coming out with more and more cloud products, cloud platforms, and options with those cloud environments. So you're actually starting to see an increased capability of consuming cloud from a viable, stalwart, if you will, corporation out there in the market. Verizon, AT&T, large telcos that are actually shifting their business. And you don't have to go to relatively small, relatively young, relatively unfunded, pre-IPO, perhaps even pre-revenue kind of companies to consume your cloud services. You're actually able to get it from large, reliable companies that have a track record and a stability in terms of their corporate life. Global is another concept to think about as well. Most companies these days have a EMEA strategy. They have a China strategy. They have an Asia-Pacific strategy. Cloud providers are increasingly having pressure put on them to have cloud platforms deployed to these various locations. Cloud is not a magical, ubiquitous, it's everywhere, kind of concept. It actually is built on top of industry standard technology. It's built on top of hardware, the same servers and storage and networking equipment that we're all used to before cloud was even a word in our, in our IT vocabulary. So having cloud platforms deployed to various locations around the world becomes a critical concept if you want to break into the Chinese market, for example, or if you want to establish a footprint in EMEA. You've got to have a cloud vendor that can actually help you by having cloud platforms deployed in those locations. You certainly don't want that internet traffic coming back across the pond or across the Pacific to get back to the US if that's the only option for your cloud deployment. So then, and think about security as well. So sort of purposely left on the last bullet item here, security is almost always the first topic of conversation. When you start talking to bigger companies about cloud adoption, security becomes the most important piece of the conversation. So it becomes very critical for a cloud provider to actually be able to sit down with the corporation, help them understand how that platform is secured. What are some of the options that are included? What are some of the options that you can layer on to increase the security? How do we go about handling audits and certification? Certain industries have certain certifications like HIPAA, like PCI, like ISO 27001. There's various different certifications that are required in various industries, and it becomes critical that your chosen vendor, your chosen cloud vendor, actually help you achieve those certifications and pass those audits. So all the way to the point where you're actually going through the data center, touring the facility, understanding access points, understanding the physical aspects of it, even though you've bought cloud. When you're concerned about these types of security measures and these types of audits, physical security is actually a big component of it. So the vendors have to be used to that. They have to have a way to address those needs on an individual customer basis. So what's in the cloud? In terms of adoption, we're sort of early in this adoption life cycle. If you think about what's going on today in the world, really a lot of cloud vendors are out there selling their wares and capabilities for rapid deployment, variable workload type applications. Cloud is well suited for that today, right? So we've got lots of different options, lots of vendors that are out there. Where is it going in the future? So if you think about as cloud capabilities increase, as security increases, and as levels of comfort increase, which is also a very important concept, you'll start to see more shifting of commodity IT into the cloud. Start to see shifting of, call it email services, call it authentication services, other things that you typically think of as these are our bread and butter back office IT things that are necessary to make our corporation run. You'll start to see more and more shift there, commodity IT stuff. Then you start getting into core IT. Start thinking about ticketing systems and industry-specific applications that the IT department usually provides for the company. You'll start to see more shift there. And again, for that to happen, there's got to be a tighter integration from a networking perspective. Got to be tighter integration from an authentication perspective, security and controls. You've got other things to think about in terms of audit that you're going to have to get penetration testing and other things done to make sure that cloud platform is going to stand up to that rigor and use. Ultimately, the ultimate goal is to really get the differentiated applications into the cloud as well, right? We've got a long way to go. this is where corporations actually put their secret sauce into the cloud. The cloud's been around for a little while now. We're getting there. We're crossing some of these hurdles, some of these humps, making the cloud more reliable. But that's the ultimate goal, is to actually get the secret sauce for the corporations deployed into the cloud in a safe, secure way, in a way that makes sense for the corporation. When we get there, we've really solved this problem. So again, if we look at it today, if you think about complexity and criticality, right now we're seeing easy stuff in the cloud, easy analytics, storage, things like that. On the opposite end of the scale, we're looking at variable workloads, email, e-commerce, Black Friday type applications, things like that. That's what's showing up in the cloud today. The big question, obviously, is the cloud secure enough? So let's focus on this for just a second. As you think about enterprise use of the cloud, there are different things that you can do to help secure it. Cloud, in and of itself, typically implies a multi-tenant platform, right? So you've got a set of infrastructure, which is always a finite set of infrastructure, that a number of customers have access to. So how do you protect those individual customers from each other, and how do you protect all of them from the outside world? These are critical things. A third concept is, how do you protect these customers from nefarious activity within the organization? So these three concepts are all things that have to be thought about and looked at. For example, does the cloud environment come with firewalls and load balancers to help you separate the environment from the rest of the world? How are the individual customers on the platform separated from each other? Do they share the same IP space, same IP address space, or do they get their own private IP address space? Is that private IP address space customizable? Is it expandable? Can I use VLANs to help segment traffic within my own environment? How about security controls on the virtual machines that are running on the cloud, so that some of my administrators have access to some of those virtual machines, but other administrators have access to other virtual machines, and they don't have to all have access to everything? Is that possible, right? So there's all kinds of different things that you've got to look at in terms of the reality of how the cloud is set up, how it's made available, and how it's secured, both within the environment and between the environments and to the outside world. Any questions there? No? Okay. We're moving quickly. So, what will the future cloud look like? What are some of the things that the cloud industry in general is doing to help get to the next level for the various cloud platforms that are out there? Well, I'll tell you that the cost per VM is going to continue to fall, right? So I can stand up here today and tell you that it's X, and next year if I stand up here and give a similar presentation, the price will probably be less than X per VM, right? So the cost per VM, and how do we do that? We do that through more efficient use of technology. We do that through more efficient operational aspects of supporting and running and managing that technology. And we do that through more adoption, right? So you get more people on the cloud, you get more use on the cloud, we'll actually be able to drive costs down. Another thing that we expect to happen is that performance will increase dramatically, right? I would guess that in the next 12 months, if you're not touting your performance on the cloud, you're probably an also-ran as a vendor, as a cloud vendor, right? So performance is going to become more and more important as time marches on. Right now, it's important in some respects, with some industries, with some applications, but the reality is most people have that as a 4 or 5 or 6 most important item when they're evaluating various cloud vendors. Okay, but I think that performance is going to start increasing in terms of level of importance, and us vendors are going to have to react accordingly. So that's something that's going to be happening very soon. Complex workloads are going to be moving to more and more complex workloads are going to be moving to the cloud as well. So the idea of moving simple applications is it's out there. We're doing that very well, very rapidly today, but it takes a monumental effort today to get complex workloads moved into the cloud. It takes planning. It takes effort. Over the next few months, you'll start to see more and more automation. So automation will help move some of those complex workloads into the cloud. More and more integration, which I'm stealing a little thunder from the next slide, but basically, through automation and integration, you'll be able to make quicker decisions, more real-time decisions on how you're going to get that workload moved in and out. And then, of course, what's not said here is some of the back-end connectivity that's actually required as well. If you're relying on the public internet to move data around that's tied to these applications, then obviously you've got a different kind of scenario synchronizing data between applications, between cloud and homegrown platforms. So you've got some things to think about there with large sets of data. Obviously, automation is increasing over time as well. So we have, there's more and more automation. There's the use of APIs. So people are developing more and more API-based technologies that are either front-ending clouds or they're opening up APIs. Various cloud vendors are opening up APIs so that you can programmatically take advantage of the cloud resources that are out there. OpenStack's a good example of this. Terremark's API-based enterprise cloud is another good example as well. So automation is going to continue to drive forward. And then, of course, I already mentioned it, networks and connected clouds. So not only within an organization, but also multi-vendor connectivity, right? So the idea of adopting open standards, many vendors adopting open standards, being able to communicate between themselves with various cloud calls, API calls, moving workload from one platform to another, one location to another. This is going to become more and more critical as time marches on as well. And there's a lot of ideas out there, there's a lot of capabilities out there, but they're immature at best, and they're going to become more and more mature over time. So you'll see more info and more news in this area as well. Question?
Yeah, thank you. With respect to integration, are big vendors like yourself doing anything against standardizing these APIs or provide a standard integration methodology?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question was, are the big vendors, the big cloud vendors, are you doing anything to actually address the integration and the standardization concepts and questions that are out there? And the answer is yes. There are several different competing API standards in the market today. There are standards that don't interact with each other, right? There's different API sets from different vendors that don't interact. I think one of the things that you're actually starting to see is tools that have their own API set that are being layered over the top of the other API sets for the various vendors. BMC is one of these examples. They've adopted many different cloud APIs, integrated those APIs into their tool set, so you buy into that particular tool set platform and you have access to various other cloud platforms underneath it. So it's happening already, but there's actually another layer to the answer, right? The other layer is, are we developing any governing bodies to actually come together and say, let's define something like this, something akin to the SQL standard. Let's define a common rule set and a common way to do things. It's in its infancy. So there's some things happening there. The Cloud Security Alliance is doing some of that work in terms of security in the cloud. So it's in its infancy, but we'll start to see more and more break loose in that area probably over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's a great question. Another question?
Let me give you a mic.
We got a microphone coming. That'll save me from having to translate and repeat.
So my question is, how can cloud computing do more to tackle the challenge of big data challenge? My thought is, previously before cloud computing, we have to move data around so that to speed up parallel processing. Right now, if you look at Hadoop Selenium, MapReduce, you don't need to move data around. Actually, you have distributed computing resources. They can handle the data in distributed mode. That helps a lot on big data analytics. So how can cloud computing do more? Because right now the big data challenge is not how to solve the problem, actually is how to define, how to formulate the problem. So from your perspective, how can cloud computing do more to tackle big data challenge?
So that's a very good question. I think there's actually a couple of answers to that question. So at one level, what we can do is actually take a look at the point solutions that are out there, like Hadoop, for example. How is Hadoop solving this data movement problem, and adopt some of those concepts and capabilities as a generic cloud platform provider. And in fact, we are doing that. So there are some things already in the works from a Verizon Terremark perspective to do some of those things. And I know other vendors are doing the same thing. I think there's actually a higher level answer as well. You know, there's integration from a networking perspective. There's dedicated networks versus internet connectivity. There's staging of data. There's replication of data and other concepts that could be used on the underlying technology to help facilitate some of these concepts and big data challenges. Again, from a generic infrastructure as a service provider perspective, those concepts are in their infancy. We know they're out there. We've got to work on them. We've got some things to address. And there's going to be some exciting news coming up over the next 12 months about that with next generation cloud platforms that are in the works. Yep. Another question?
Yeah, I think the scariest thing for me for the cloud is governments. So you look at what France wanting to tax McDonald's, you look at UN wanting to control the internet, you're looking at EU having different regulations, data locality. What do you see as the risks and the dangers there, and what's the industry doing trying not to have the balkanization where we have either every country has their own rules, or worse yet, the United Nations starts to control the internet?
Right. That's a great question. So the reality is, it is what it is. And there isn't a single company on the planet, a cloud providing company like Verizon or AT&T or Savvis or Rackspace or Amazon or any of us, that could actually change what the governments want to do in terms of data protection and privacy. So what we have to do is figure out how to fit in. Where do we want to play? What do we want to live up to? Where do we want to have our cloud platforms deployed? So that's actually part of what we do as an analysis to figure out where are the most strict data privacy laws. Where do they exist? Germany, Hong Kong. Where are those places where data privacy laws have to be followed and adhered to? And do we want to invest in those locations? And do we want to use those locations as a more strict deployment so that we could serve content and cloud services from those locations to less strict locations that are nearby, right? So that's one of the things that we do. Another thing that we do is we actually partner with our customers from a governance perspective and help. We try to help them understand what our capabilities, strengths, and weaknesses are, and let them help us understand some of the very specific requirements for their industry, for the locations where they have users or technology deployed. So it's very much a two-way street, a consultative approach, if you will, a partnership to make sure that we meet or exceed the expectations from a governance perspective for the individual customers. Now, admittedly, there are some customers out there, some locations out there, where we simply can't meet the need. So we're not going to force a customer into a situation that makes them non-compliant just because we want to bring them on as a customer. So compliance becomes a very important issue in terms of adopting the cloud from any customer's perspective, and even selling it from a vendor's perspective. Did that even come close to answering the question?
Kind of a softball. But as an ISV wanting to sell multinationally, we need a partner that can help us stay out of jail in Belgium or whatnot. And so presumably part of your offering and a differentiator is ability for our hosting partner to help us navigate through all of the regulatory issues and keep us out of jail in various countries.
So it's a very good question, and we do that in locations where we know, right? Not every location on the planet is known by us in terms of very strict requirements, because frankly we don't have customers in those locations, and we don't have deployments in those locations, right? So everywhere we do have deployments and everywhere we do have customers, we learn all the time. So we get feedback from the customers. We know what we need to be able to do, and as we bring customers on board, we're able to tap into that knowledge base and say, look, have you thought about these other three concepts? Because you're going into Germany, right? There's three concepts here that you need to be aware of. Or you're going into Canada. There's a couple concepts you need to be aware of there. Or you're Canadian and you're deploying into the US. There's a couple of concepts there. So we do help our customers understand what we know, but I'm not going to profess that we know everything, right?
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or ideas, questions? Question?
So, we've talked about the cloud. You've done a great job of positioning what things we should look for as a differentiator. If I'm a customer and I go to multiple vendors who have a data center and I have the opportunity to look around, it can be confusing right? What am I looking for? Okay, I'm on another data center tour.
Right.
Why do I care as it relates to cloud? And what are the top 1 to 3 things that I should look for as a customer as I'm trying to make a decision on what cloud vendor to go with or service provider versus another?
Trina, I appreciate that softball that you just threw at me. and I owe you that $20, I promise. So honestly, I didn't plant that. But when you start thinking about adopting cloud and purchasing cloud from some vendor, right? Cloud is only as good as the infrastructure it's built on top of and the location into which it's deployed, okay? Cloud, in all situations, cloud services are built on physical assets and software-based assets, right? And so those physical assets have to sit in a data center somewhere. They have to sit on a raised floor with cooling and electricity, and they've got to be protected by physical security, armed guards at the front door, all the things that you would expect in your own data centers, right? And so when you go and tour those facilities, a couple of things to look for is, how do I get access to that facility? What if I just showed up at the front door and knocked and said, I'd like a tour? Would I be able to get in? Or is there some sort of background check that has to happen, or some sort of pre-registration that has to happen before I'm actually allowed in the front door? How is the perimeter of the building secured? Is there a way that I could, drive a car through the side of the building, and what would that give me access to, right? Is there a computer room right on the other side of that ground floor wall? Or is there perhaps some sort of parking barricade that's protecting the building from traffic if there's roads nearby? How about the connectivity in and out of the place? If you've only got one egress point, then my speech in front of prospects is that you're a backhoe away from being disconnected from the internet, right? That random backhoe shows up to dig up the road. If you've only got one egress point, that guy can hit the wrong, go 6 inches in the wrong direction, and all of a sudden you're offline. What good is your cloud service going to be if you're actually not connected to the internet anymore? So that provider needs to be able to show you different egress points in and out of the building, different options for connectivity, whether they're multi-tenant connectivity options or they're private connectivity options. These are all very important concepts. And then start thinking about electricity and cooling. How redundant are those systems? How are those systems managed? How are they backed up? What happens when local weather may affect the area? For example, Miami, Florida, hurricanes happen there all the time. We have a major data center there. If you come tour that place, I would expect you to ask questions like, what happens when a hurricane comes along? How do you handle the hurricane? Why is this building going to survive a hurricane? What have you done to make this building survive local weather patterns, right? If you go tour something in California, what's the earthquake rating, right? You know it's going to come eventually. How big of an earthquake can we handle here? So those are some of the things that I would look for. It's all the things that you actually think about when, as a corporation, when you consider building your own data center, right? How am I going to cool this thing? How redundant am I going to make the cooling? Can I get multiple power feeds? How am I going to handle a power outage from the supplier? Do I have batteries? Do I have do I have some other mechanism to facilitate that switchover? Because you're going to need it. What does that look like? How does that work? How's it managed? How's it maintained? So in the position that Terremark's in, there's a big difference between a corporation doing that on their own. They've got 1 or 2 data centers in critical locations, and you think about cooling systems. There's 1 day a month that you go out and check the cooling systems, right? From a Terremark perspective, we've got 50 data centers all around the world. They've got hundreds of thousands of square feet of raised floor space. We have whole teams of people that's all they do is go check cooling systems 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So it's a whole different scale. And so getting your head around how does that happen, how are these things managed and dealt with, becomes critical, even though you're talking about cloud services. So just because you're looking at cloud doesn't mean that you shouldn't be interested or concerned about how all that physical stuff under the cloud is actually owned, operated, managed, and dealt with. Okay? That's a great question. All right, I'm going to move on here. We've got about 10 minutes left. Oh, that's it. I thought I had one more slide, but anyway, any other thoughts or ideas? I'm happy to field some more, even some hard ones. You want to throw me a fastball, see if I can swing at that, or a curve even?
Oh, you see, it's never too early for fastballs. That's given him inspiration.
Well, since you asked for it, you had remarked earlier about the performance of the systems and the cost will be declining. There's a Big Mac index of the cloud cost, and to me that's an AWS instance. And frankly, over the last 5 years, the cost of computing, as measured by Amazon, which is just real public, has come down surprisingly little as well as storage, much less than Moore's law. So you implied you saw an acceleration of this increased price performance? Or?
Well, so it's not that there's necessarily an acceleration. I think we'll continue to drive cost out of the business and increase performance along the way. Now, we do get opportunities every now and then where somebody wants me to tie future cost of cloud services with Moore's law kind of reductions. And you can't do that necessarily because there's this thing in the middle called innovation that has to take place too, right? So while Moore's law continues to give us more computing for the same or less cost, there's innovation that happens from my perspective. I'm going to roll more and more features and capabilities and options into the cloud platform during that same time. So, and Amazon is probably doing the same thing. Of course they're doing the same thing. They roll out new features all the time. So they take some of that potential reduction and turn it back into R&D, create new capabilities and new ideas, new things that you can use, take advantage of, that don't let the cost actually dip as much as you would expect if it's tied directly to Moore's law. But having said that, I think we are going to continue to see price pressure. There's more competitors in the market. There's more adoption happening. And as this continues to go, I mean, the natural inclination is that things are going to get more competitive. We're going to get more efficient at what we do. And that's going to allow us to lower prices to win more customers over time as well. And I think every cloud vendor is going to fit into that category.
Hang on, coming up.
Yeah, as an infrastructure as a service provider, what's your take on platform as a service? Obviously, software as a service right now is also very successful.
Yes.
Like Salesforce.com. So what's your take as platform as service on platform as service?
We better get ourselves in gear. We don't have any platform as a service offerings today inside of Terremark. Now, Verizon has some platform as a service products that are out there, but there is increasing demand for other platform as a service offerings such as database as a service, Ruby on Rails as a service, the Microsoft stack as a service, the LAMP stack as a service. We have to get ourselves in gear, right? So we're a little behind the curve on that. It is growing in popularity, growing in demand, and I think it's going to be a major shift for most of us infrastructure as a service providers into the next 12 months.
And how do you actively compete with Amazon, AWS, and Rackspace? Because we are using Rackspace right now.
Yep.
And how do you compete with them?
We compete with those guys all day, every day, right? So it's like Ford, Chevy, and all the other automobile manufacturers. We have strengths and weaknesses. They have strengths and weaknesses. And we win customers where our strengths are more important to those customers, and they win them where their strengths are more important. A lot of the times where we win over our competitors is location is critical, right? A lot of times we have customers that want to be in a very specific location, whether it's a specific country or a specific region within a country. We often win deals where compliance and audit requirements are very heavy. Those are, where we run into a customer that they have to be PCI compliant, or they have to pass certain audits and certain verifications on a timely basis. Those are deals that are very important for us. We often win situations where many different departments within a company want to have access to cloud for various reasons, and they want consolidated billing, they want a consolidated security model, and they want some standardization around accessing and using the portal. So those things they're important to a lot of the customers that we win as well.
Actually, Amazon is very innovative in terms of at that level, infrastructure level. And Rackspace, they endorse the OpenStack model in order to compete with Amazon very effectively.
Yes.
That's me.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Question?
I'm familiar with Terremark. I'm a current customer, but one of the things as being in this industry a long time, you read a lot of publications. What is, I don't know if this is a fastball or not, but why isn't Terremark pumping? I mean, certainly advertising more, talking about more of the things that you guys offer. I mean, I think their services are great, but you still read a lot more about what's happening with Amazon and Rackspace, and Microsoft's coming out with their platform as a service infrastructure. Why aren't we hearing more from Terremark about what the good things you guys are doing, and not just
That's another great question. To be truthful, the honesty is that we were acquired by Verizon coming up on 2 years ago. January of 2011 was when the announcement was made, and April was when it was finalized. So honestly, we've spent the last 12, 18 months getting ourselves organized, merging the companies. Terremark was a 16 data center company. We had 16 data centers around the world prior to the acquisition. There are now 50 data centers with the Terremark badge on them. And so, I mean, that's a monumental effort to sort of take over those locations, the people that work there, the customer deployments that are in those locations, the contracts, the customers themselves, the expectations, the support groups, and all the while trying to streamline the back office systems, the HR systems, the payroll systems, and all that stuff, and then still continue to keep our eye on the innovation on the cloud. So we've spent a lot of time doing a lot of that back office stuff and all the things that you don't want to go brag about in the market, and now we're starting to get focused on innovation again. And so it hasn't died, but it's been really backburnered for a while. You'll start to see more and more information coming in the next 3 to 4 months. There will be more announcements about upcoming releases, future features, and even whole new platforms that are coming from Verizon Terremark. It's a great question.
Fantastically honest answer. Any more for any more? Here we are.
Good morning, Jim. I'm Richard Mann from BT. BT and Verizon compete, so you don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
That's okay. We're all friends here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So just going back to your enterprise adoption, in financial services, are you seeing much adoption from that vertical? Because obviously the acid test is how much of their critical apps they're moving to the cloud.
Yeah, we actually are. There's a lot of interest, right? So there's a couple of unique challenges with the financial services firms. The easy workload, as I denoted on my little chart there, the easy workload for the financial services firms is analysis when there's major dips and changes in the market, right? So whenever there's a major change in the market, they spin up all these virtual machines and they do all this analysis on what's going on and what can we predict and what can we do about it and all this other stuff. And think of it as a HPC sort of application, high performance computing. It's very transient and very temporary, right? And they go from needing nothing for months and months to needing thousands of virtual machines and nearly infinite amounts of CPU capabilities for a limited window to do this analysis. So right now, that's the easy answer for them to move to the cloud because they can blow the data away, they can delete it, and it doesn't, there's no compliance issues associated with it as long as they can confirm that it's gone. However, there's not a lot of cloud vendors out there of sizable scale, of any relative scale, that can actually handle that kind of demand. Now, there are HPC vendors that are out there, but on a Black Friday kind of event, stock market crash kind of event, all of those financial services firms are going to need services like that, and it's going to overload or overwhelm nearly any single cloud provider that's out there. And so there's challenges there. Now, there's a ton of interest. There's several financial services firms that are looking at other uses of the cloud beyond the obvious, certain marketing campaigns, consumer campaigns, consumer websites, transient consumer websites. So there's analysis going into that. We're working with several on the East Coast to do things like that. And the adoption rate is going to be high once the security hurdle is overcome. And so there's various options that are being put in place there. Another critical aspect of working with the financial services firms is that just about any multi-tenant audit or security device that you want to attach to the cloud is not good enough for a financial services firm. So most likely they're always going to want dedicated devices, physical devices. They're going to want to control those devices themselves and not grant access to any other employee of mine or theirs. They have a very finite number of people who have access to those things. So we're working with a couple of different firms to create very specific co-location cages with biometric scanning, whether it's, we actually do a vascular scanning on the back of the hand and some other things to make sure that the right people are allowed into the cage and the wrong people are kept out. And then allow them to front end the cloud environment with certain pieces of technology that help them meet those standards. So they can capture packets, they can capture traffic, and they can do all the things that are necessary to ensure that that environment, even though it's multi-tenant, is still actually secure, safe, and there's nothing nefarious going on. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
A vascular scan, the things you learn at Cloud Expo this early in the morning.
Yes, we have a vascular scan device that allows you into a cage. You hold onto a grip, it looks at your blood vessels and says, yep, that's you.
Okay, right. A question. Here, this will be the last question.
We have 12
I'm afraid.
seconds.
Well, it's real easy. What are you seeing as the intersection between big data and BYOD and the cloud?
That's a good question. There's a lot of work going into some analysis with big data and bring your own device concepts. I would say that from our perspective, we haven't gotten there yet with products and services to address the demand, but it's coming. So watch for some announcements that coming up in the next 3 to 4 months. You'll see some things, exciting things coming out of Verizon Terremark.
Now it has its innovation mojo back. I like that. Let's please thank Terremark's VP, Jim Anthony, engaging as ever. Thank you for encouraging those questions, Jim.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you, audience.